Hello, friends. Welcome to Kids Corner. Our story today is called Joshua and the City of Jericho. Remember that guy in the Bible called Moses? He led the children of Israel out of Egypt. He brought them through a lot of tough times and went up the mountain to get the 10 Commandments from God. Well, when his life was coming to an end, God told him to appoint Joshua as the new leader of the children of Israel. Joshua was going to lead God's people into the special land that God had promised to give them. By this time, God's people had been wandering around in that baking desert for 40 years. So you can imagine how sick they were of sand and tents and walking and just being hot. You can imagine how happy they were to reach the edge of the desert and to see their beautiful new home right there in front of them, all cool and green and lovely. There was only one problem: Jericho. Jericho was a city, but it wasn't just any old city. It was a fortress, and it stopped anyone from getting into the land. The children of Israel looked at Jericho, at the big, giant, scary walls around it, at the heavy iron gates bolted shut. Then they looked at each other. What would they do? No one knew, but God knew. Joshua was wondering how God would help him capture the great walled city of Jericho. He saw a man with a sword nearby. "Are you a friend or enemy?" Joshua asked. "I am God's messenger," said the angel, "and the commander of God's army." Joshua fell to his knees and said, "Tell me what God wants me to do." And God told Joshua just what to do. But Joshua must have looked surprised, because it was a very odd battle plan indeed, as we'll soon find out. Then God made his people a promise. "I will always be with you, and I will never, ever leave you. If you do what I say, your lives in the new land will be happy, and everything will go well." So Joshua gathered his army together. They had their swords and spears and shields. They were ready to fight. Joshua said, "God will give us the walled city of Jericho, but we must do what he says." But God's plan wasn't about fighting. It was about trusting and doing what God said. Joshua's army went marching, marching, marching around the city, day after day after day, once every day for 6 days. "They're too scared to fight," the people in Jericho said. But they were wrong. God's people weren't scared. They were waiting for God to tell them what to do next. On the 7th day, God told his people to march around the city, not once, but 7 times. Then God told everyone to make as much noise as they could, with the priests blowing their trumpets. Has anyone ever told you to make as much noise as you possibly can? Well, imagine that noise. And then add 39,999 other people making that noise too. And you get the idea. Ear splitting. And as it turned out, stone splitting too, because the huge, strong walls of Jericho just crumbled to the ground, as if they were made of sand. Jericho vanished in a great cloud of dust. So it was that God's people entered their new home, and they didn't have to fight to get in. They only had to walk. The city was theirs, not by a strong army fighting, but by God's power. This was one of my favorite stories when I was a kid. I just love it. Let's look at a couple of things that we can learn from it. First, this story reminds us that God has a plan for everything. When we trust Him, we know that everything will work out the way God wants it to. And number 2, don't forget that God gave the Israelites a new leader in Joshua who would take them into their new home. One day in the future, God would send another leader to save His children. That person would be Jesus. And if we know Him, He will take us to our new home one day in heaven. Here is a verse to help us remember God's promise to be with us forever. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Joshua 1:5.